Hello, Chris and I are here as part of the OC Global Compliance team. And that's a team that works with clients to assess their compliance risks and advise them on how they can improve their structures and their systems and effect a positive culture change to deal with compliance. We are here today to talk about how compliance can be viewed holistically and how businesses can put in place effective compliance systems across the whole plethora of different regulatory obligations. And there are a few, Chris, aren't there? I mean, businesses are tackling privacy, they're tackling competition, fraud and bribery, health, safety and environment, cybersecurity. All of these factors they have to deal with at the same time.
They do, and the trend is absolutely towards that increasing ever more. And we're expecting further failure to prevent offences to come in, and the transparency drive at the moment means companies are having to understand their risks and their exposures and how they mitigate them and what their obligations are in relation to that information and what they need to report or what they need to make public. And that burden is only going to increase for companies.
And of course, if they get it wrong, the penalties that they face are also ever increasing and now eye-wateringly often expressed as a percentage of turnover or of global turnover, so they can be huge. Plus you have the impact of personal liability for directors and senior officers, and of course the reputation risk that comes with this, and it causes untold damage to a brand, I think.
Absolutely. There is the bottom line, fines and penalties, and whether it's deferred prosecution agreements in relation to bribery issues and dealing with the SFO, or whether it's a GDPR violation. You also have the internal cost of the resources that you're having to devote to get to those resolutions, and the reputational risk is an increasing factor for a number of clients. And this is driven in part by some of the legislation, such as the Modern Slavery Act, being deliberately crafted to use reputation management to drive change.
It's really interesting. So with that context, what we are seeing is a number of businesses looking to approach compliance in a different way, because compliance has traditionally been siloed into a number of different departments. You have a data protection officer, you have a health and safety manager, a number of different people within the legal team perhaps take on some functions as well. They're often not coordinated, they're often not learning best practice together. And so there have been a number of companies now that have looked to appoint a single officer who takes on that role of coordinating and bringing together all of those compliance functions and then looking to deliver the efficiencies that come with that.
That's absolutely right. That Chief Compliance Officer role is increasingly common, and whether it's a title given to someone in the legal team or it is a bespoke appointment, it's an increasingly common answer to how companies gather the information and gain the understanding of what's going on in their business in a holistic way, and then are able to formulate strategies to deal with that are not caught within silos.
So we know that compliance is a risk that a lot of GCs and a lot of board directors, it worries them, it keeps them awake at night. What does a business do when they know that they have some systems in place, they know that they've got various policies that have been written, but it's that feeling of maybe we are not going far enough. Are we actually keeping pace with what our competitors or our peers are doing? How can they go about making that assessment?
Well, I think the first thing the company needs to think about is what are the risks they're trying to deal with, and understanding what their exposure is to those risks. And then you take a view on what the information is that you're gathering at the moment and to what extent you can verify that information. Because in issues such as bribery, companies are now increasingly asking, well, we have an obligation as part of trying to develop adequate procedures to monitor and develop those procedures over time. And what does that mean? And what's everybody else doing? And it's a question that a lot of our clients are asking. So there is that underlying driver, but there is also a need for companies to be efficient in their compliance in the same way that they are in other areas of their business. And so when you're seeking to gather this information and work out where responsibility sits, it makes sense to deal with these risks together rather than trying to deal with each of them individually.
Yeah, I I think that's right. I mean, that analysis of risk and also prioritising risk. I mean, Rome is not built in a day, as they say. You can't possibly tackle everything, but you do need to tackle the really big stuff, the things that could have a massive impact upon your business and in effect shut you down. So you start at that point, and you can evaluate that risk and then look at the quality of the systems that you have in place.
I think that's very true. And I think there's a recognition across a number of these areas that companies won't be flying high straight from the off. But with something like bribery, they've now had a number of years in which to get their systems up and running effectively. And so there is an expectation that they're on top of these risks. And as new issues get added, like modern slavery or other failure to prevent offences, then they need to be incorporating that into their systems rather than trying to remake the wheel each time.
Do you think boards and in-house legal teams are becoming more a sort of appreciative and understanding of compliance risks, or do you think it's still seen as a drag and something that people have got to get through, if you like?
I think it varies from board to board. Often when there is a particular issue, perhaps an investigation or some criminal conduct, some kind of crisis drives the board to focus on these issues, and that gives an opportunity to in-house counsel to actually try and bring out of that crisis a positive agenda for wider change. But some boards are looking more towards this issue and thinking, how can we both improve the efficiency of our compliance systems, but also as part of our efforts to grow the business, particularly internationally and into different sectors, are our systems fit for purpose to be able to control the risks that growth is going to create?
That's right, Chris, but I'm a great believer in making sure that you don't have systems and policies and procedures just for the sake of having them. In fact, in many ways, I'd rather you didn't have any if you have them and you never follow them and nobody ever looks at them. And I think it's really important that in addition to that system, you've got to have the culture that goes with that. And that's hard to achieve, getting a culture whereby people almost inherently want to follow the systems that you've set up, or are psychologically nudged, if you like, into following certain systems, is hard to achieve. But I think you can get that culture shift, and I think if you've got that and you combine that with some very practical, easy to read, sensible policies and procedures, you're far more likely to get your effective compliance system.
That's right. And what companies need to do is make sure that they are putting in place policies and procedures that their employees can work with and can live with, and not overburden them with procedures that could become hostages to fortune in the future.
Yes, we've certainly seen that play out in a few court cases. So really, compliance is here to stay. It would be very sensible now for business to put this on the agenda and make sure that they're trying to devote some time to this. I think you made the very valid point that when you've had a crisis or an issue, it's really, that puts compliance up the agenda and makes people focus on it. But it does need to be a business as usual thing as well, and assessing where you're at with where you really should be or where you could be is a very good thing.
I think that's very true, and I think it's something that boards are going to be increasingly forced to focus on, because it's going to be an increasing focus of the legislation and the rules under which they're operating.
Thank you.